The village of Redwater liked to joke that only the winter wind was strong enough to make that giant Apache woman bow her head. They said she was so tall that 3 grown men standing beside her still would not reach her shoulder. They said she did not know what softness was, that all she knew was how to hold on to her anger like she was gripping a dry piece of timber. But then, one day, the wind in Redwater changed. 3 white men, each carrying his own private wound, found their way to her for reasons that matched no one else's. And in that winter, the town would come to understand that the scariest thing was not her strength, but the strength of 3 hearts willing to stand beside her for the rest of their lives. The story begins on the northern edge of Redwater, where the pines grew so thick that even noon sunlight had a hard time slipping through. Deep in that forest stood a log house larger than any other house in the village. It stood alone, like an outsider. Few people ever dared to go near it, not because of wild animals, but because they were afraid of meeting Nayara. Her Apache name meant light in the storm, yet the villagers looked at her as if she were the darkness. Nayara was nearly as tall as her own doorframe, her shoulders broad, muscles carved in clear lines beneath her deep brown skin. When she walked, the wet earth held deep prints, as if someone carrying stones had passed that way. People in the village said she was frightening. What they did not know was that she was frightening only because she had spent too long having to protect herself. That morning, snow lay thick across Nayara's roof. The smell of burning wood slipped out through the cracks in the door. Inside the wide room, she stood alone before the fire, her large hands stripping bark from the firewood. A sigh escaped her. No one but the forest heard it. "Shamama, why do I have to live as if I deserve to be shunned?" she whispered to herself. It was the only truth she dared say out loud. Outside, the wind slipped under the doorframe as if it wanted to answer her with a long, lonely howl. In the heart of Redwater, people still told the story of how she once threw an entire wood cask into the creek in a fit of anger at a drunken man. No one ever mentioned that it was that very man who had called her by a name not worth repeating. No one knew she lay awake many nights afterward, heavy with regret. The whole town remembered only the moment she was strongest. No one saw the moments when she was tender and tired. But in the winter of 1924, fate chose to step out of the forest's shadow. The first person to come to Nayara's door was Elias Turner, a lean but sturdy man with sad gray eyes, a color you did not often see in Western folk. He had once been a carpenter, but after his wife died the year before, he found himself unable to build anything at all. That day he stood at her doorway, holding a long board he had just planed smooth. His voice was soft, almost shaking. "I heard you are fixing your roof. If you will let me, I could help." Nayara looked at him for a long time. No one in town had ever asked to help her with anything. The honesty in Elias's eyes caught her so off guard that the answer slipped from her tongue before she could think. "All right." The second man came a week later. Calvin Ward, the barkeep of Redwater, a big-boned man whose heart had been bruised by war. On the outside, he looked tough, but in truth, he was someone few people dared to get close to because of the sorrow he carried in his eyes. When Nayara stepped into his saloon that day, the room went silent as it always did. But Calvin was not afraid of her. He simply set his glass down and asked in his low voice, "What can I get you to drink? Do not worry. I am not like the rest of them." Nayara answered with just one line, "I know." The third man arrived on the day the snow fell heaviest. Rowan Briggs, a horse handler who lived on the southern edge of the village, weathered face, gentle smile, and a loneliness most people overlooked. He came to her house leading a limping horse. "I heard you know how to treat a horse's leg. I was hoping you might help." As Nayara knelt to examine the animal's leg, Rowan watched her as if he were seeing for the first time a person trying to hide her tenderness behind a strong suit of armor. Nayara did not dare look back at him because her heart had suddenly tightened in her chest. Redwater did not know that these three men, though strangers to one another, all carried wounds deeper than the winter snow. And somehow, in their own ways, they all found their path to the same person. The woman the whole town had once believed no one would ever dare to love. Nayara had not realized that yet, but this winter would make her understand. Winter in Redwater lasted longer than usual. The snow lay so thick that every step on the ground sounded like walking over a layer of cold, packed cotton. In that stillness, every time Nayara stepped out of her house, her footsteps rang out like someone knocking on the heart of the earth. But what made that winter different was not the snow. It was the way three men slowly walked into her life in ways she never could have imagined. Elias Turner was the one who unsettled her the most. He was not afraid of her. He did not look for excuses to start trouble. He simply came every morning, carrying his old tool bag and a fresh board he had just shaped. His voice was low and slow, as if every word had to pass through a sorrow no one else could see. One day, while they were working on the roof together, he suddenly said, "Winters are bitter here. Living alone out here cannot be easy." Nayara only lowered her head, her hand tightening around a wooden peg. "Being alone is not as cold as being looked at like you are some kind of wild animal." Elias stopped what he was doing. He looked at her for a long moment. I do not believe you deserve to be seen that way." That was all he said, but those words stayed with Nayara the whole night. Calvin Ward came to her in a different way. Whenever she walked into his saloon, nobody dared speak. Only Calvin would set a warm drink in front of her, without prying, without polite small talk. One evening, when the place had finally gone quiet, Calvin stood behind the bar and watched her for a long time before saying, "You know, people fear you because they do not understand you. But I have been afraid of a lot of things in my life, and you are not one of them." Nayara looked at him, her dark eyes flashing with a brief, surprised light. "Why not?" Calvin wiped his hands on a cloth. "Because you are like me, strong on the outside, but inside, just doing everything you can to stay standing." Those words touched something deep inside Nayara, a place she had thought she left behind long ago. Rowan Briggs's way of coming close was different still. Rowan did not talk much, but his eyes were always warm, like fire at the end of the day. The day he brought the limping horse to her, Nayara gently laid her hand on the animal's leg. While she calmed it, Rowan watched her as if he were seeing something rare, a person trying to hide her gentleness behind armor made of strength. When she asked him what had happened to the horse's leg, Rowan only answered, "I think it is afraid of thunder, like I was when I was a boy." She glanced up at him. "You were afraid of thunder?" Rowan smiled faintly. "Not so much now, but whenever the sky cracks open, I still remember not having anyone to run to." Those words made Nayara's hands pause for just a moment, because she understood that feeling better than anyone. Three men, each finding their way into a different corner of her heart, without noise, without rivalry, coming quietly as if they had all been waiting for this very winter to appear. But what she did not know was that they each saw her in three different ways. Elias saw the endurance of a woman who had been misunderstood her whole life, yet had never once fallen. Calvin saw the anger forged from too many years of swallowing hurt. Rowan saw the softness she kept hidden behind all that strength, and they loved what they saw, each in his own way, each from within his own wound. For the first time, Redwater began to pay attention. They saw Elias walking to her house every morning. They saw Calvin waiting for her in the saloon when the wind picked up. They saw Rowan smile whenever he talked about how she had healed his horse. Then the whispering started. At first it was simple curiosity, then it turned to fear, and finally, envy. Because for the first time in the town's history, 3 white men were openly drawn to the same woman the whole village had once called a monster. One evening, just as Nayara stepped out of the saloon, a small, sharp-eyed woman from the village looked at her with bitter contempt. "You think any of those 3 men would actually be willing to marry you?" Nayara stopped. Her dark eyes, deep as night, rested on the woman. No anger, no hatred, only weariness. "No one has to be willing," Nayara said, "because I have never forced anyone to walk beside me." When she turned and stepped back into the white curtain of snow, all 3 men, standing not far away, saw and heard everything. And in that moment, each one of them understood that his heart had taken a turn onto a road there would be no coming back from. Snow began to fall thicker toward the end of December, covering every narrow road in Redwater in white. It was the time of year when the villagers usually shut their doors early, fed the fires in their stoves, and avoided going out unless they truly had to. But that winter, the 3 men made everything feel different. They appeared in the places where Nayara walked, not to compete, but like pieces of a story that even they did not fully understand. One morning, Elias was fixing the wooden door of her barn when a group of village men passed by. They stopped to stare, their eyes full of open mockery. One of them spoke loud enough for the whole forest to hear. "Elias, are you sure you want to be helping someone like that?" Elias did not look at them. He only answered quietly, "If she needs help, I will help." The man barked out a laugh. "She is stronger than the 3 of us put together. The only thing she needs is a bigger chain." Elias froze, then lifted his gray eyes. "Cold now. Do not talk about her like that." But the men only laughed and moved on, leaving a heavy silence hanging between the pines. When they were gone from sight, Nayara stepped out from inside. She had heard it all. She simply looked at Elias, her voice low and tired. "You did not have to speak up for me." Elias answered slowly, "I was not speaking up for you. I was just saying what is right." Nayara turned her face slightly away, but in her eyes a small, fragile light flickered. Something she did not dare accept, yet could not quite deny. A few days later, trouble found Calvin Ward. A gang of drunk young men came into his saloon, saying they wanted to get a look at that giant Apache woman he kept defending. When Calvin told them to leave, one of them smashed a bottle right in front of the bar. "Or maybe you are trying to protect her because you like her." Calvin did not get angry. He just watched them with tired eyes. "She does not need me to protect her." One of them laughed loud. "No, but you sure do." Nayara was standing just outside the door when she heard the glass break. She stepped in, her shadow swallowing the light from the oil lamps. The young men went silent at once. None of them dared meet the eyes of a woman whose head nearly touched the saloon ceiling. The cold seemed to walk in with her, dragging the whole winter behind it. "Leave," Nayara said. Her voice was low, tight like the surface of water just before it splits. No one argued. They left in a clumsy hurry. Calvin watched her for a long moment. "Thank you." Nayara answered, "I just did not want them causing trouble." A rare smile touched Calvin's lips. "Whatever the reason, I am still grateful." She turned away quickly, but not quickly enough to hide the warmth spreading slowly through her chest. Rowan was the only one people did not tease about Nayara, not because they did not want to, but because everyone knew Rowan had once taken on 3 men just to save a horse that was being beaten. They feared him in a different way, but Rowan never used that fear as a way to get close to her. He came quietly, the way wind moves over the grass. One afternoon, he came to check on his horse's leg and handed her a small bag of dried herbs. "For you, in case your shoulders start to ache," he said. Nayara looked at the bag, unsure what to do with it. "My shoulders do not hurt." Rowan smiled softly. "Strong people get tired too." The words were not loud, not especially poetic, but they made her heart sink gently inside her. For the first time in many years, she felt that someone truly saw how worn out she was. When Rowan left, the snow filled in his footprints behind him. Those same footprints seemed to press down over Nayara's heart. It was a large heart, but it had not known where to place anyone for a very long time. By the end of the month, the villagers' gossip grew louder. The 3 men did not avoid one another, but they did not seek each other out either. Each of them gave Nayara something different. Elias gave patience, Calvin gave understanding, Rowan gave warmth. And that was what unsettled Redwater. Because for the first time in the town's history, 3 good men had all fallen into the same orbit, around the woman the village had spent years fearing. But the most surprising thing had not happened yet. It was on its way, and winter would be the one to bring the news. The last days of winter in Redwater always carried the sharp, cold scent of pine and the sound of wind sweeping over the rooftops like a warning. The old folks in the village said that when the wind blew from the north, winter did not just bring snow. It brought truth. And that year, truth began the moment the dark clouds gathered thick over the distant mountains. That afternoon, Nayara was stacking wood on her porch when she heard hoofbeats in the distance, coming fast. A few seconds later, Rowan appeared, his face tight with worry. "Nayara, Elias is missing." "He went down to fix the fence in the valley this morning, and it is almost dark, and he still has not come back." Nayara set the log down on the ground. "Are you sure?" Rowan nodded hard. "I checked all around. There are skid marks near the creek. The water is running high." The wind tore through Nayara's hair. For a moment, she did not feel the cold at all. She felt only one thing. "Then we are going." They mounted and drove their horses through the deep snow. Rowan led the way, and Nayara fought to push down the rising fear inside her chest. She did not want to say it out loud, but among the 3 men who had come into her life, Elias was the one who made her feel like she was not a monster. He treated her like a person. No fear, no tiptoeing, no staring at her like she was some strange thing. Deep inside, she knew that had changed something in her. When they neared the creek, Rowan pointed to a long mark in the ground. His horse slipped here. Redwater Creek was swollen and wild after the forest storms. The water churned up muddy and rough. Nayara looked down at it, her heart pounding. Elias. Her voice was low, but it carried into the trees. Rowan hurried to speak. "Wait, he might have found shelter somewhere." But she did not wait a second longer. She raced down the narrow path that hugged the edge of the creek, her powerful legs cutting through the snow as if she did not feel the weight of the earth at all. She called his name again, her voice echoing through the valley like a drum. "Elias." At last, a reply, faint and weak. "Over here." Nayara whipped toward the sound. At the base of a rocky slope, Elias was clinging to a thick tree root. One leg was pinned under a boulder, and the creek was already up to his waist. His face lifted toward her, exhausted, but still carrying a tired little smile. "I guess I fell a bit too far." Rowan immediately ran along the bank, searching for a way down. But the slope was slick enough that just standing was a challenge. Nayara studied the cracks in the stone, then looked at Elias struggling to hold on. She did not think any further. She crouched down beside Rowan. "Hold the rope tight." Before he could even ask, Nayara had already wrapped the rope around her own waist. She gave it one hard tug to be sure it would hold. Rowan nodded, his voice unsteady. "I have got you." Nayara stepped to the edge of the rocks, placing her large feet where most people would never dare. Water splashed up into her face, but her eyes never left Elias. His breath came in ragged bursts. "I knew you would find me," he said. The cold creek slapped at her legs, but her voice stayed steady. "No one gets left behind in these woods." She moved lower, one hand braced on the roots, the other reaching out toward him. "Take my hand." Elias managed a weak grin, lips already turning blue. "I think this is the first time you have told me what to do, and I listened right away." She blew out a hard breath. "Take it, Elias." He took her hand. His hand was small in her huge palm, cold but trusting. With one fierce, decisive pull, Nayara lifted him clear of the roaring water beneath them. Rowan held the rope tight, as if he were hauling both of them back from the edge. When the three of them finally tumbled onto the packed snow of the bank, Elias lay there gasping, staring up at the gray sky. Nayara knelt beside him, and for the first time in many years, her hands trembled. Elias opened his eyes and looked at her. "Thank you," Nayara answered, her voice rough from the wind. "All that matters is you are alive." When they returned, Calvin was already standing in front of her house, his face lined with worry. When he saw all three of them safe, he let out a long breath and said only one thing. "I am glad you brought him back." Nayara looked at him and felt the sincerity in those words. That day, in Redwater's biting cold, the three white men understood that they no longer stood outside Nayara's life. And Nayara realized something even harder to believe. She was no longer standing outside theirs. The bond had begun, and winter still had not spoken its last word. After the night they pulled Elias from the edge of the creek, snow fell for 3 days and 3 nights, covering Redwater as if it meant to bury everything under a single enormous white blanket. The little houses sank into silence. Even the wind grew less vicious, as if it understood that inside the log cabin at the edge of the woods, something was changing. In that cabin, 3 men sat by the fire, each lost in his own thoughts. Rowan glanced toward the door now and then, as if checking whether the storm had passed. Calvin sat close to the stove, cutting sideways looks at Nayara that could not quite hide his concern. Elias, his leg wrapped in herbs and cloth, simply drank the hot water she had poured for him. Nayara stood near the hearth, her broad shoulders painted in gold by the firelight. Since everything had happened, her heart felt heavier, yet no longer as cold as before. Those 3 men had walked into her life by 3 different paths, but they had all done the same thing. They made her remember that she was human, not a monster, not the fear that haunted the town. Calvin was the first to speak. I think. You do not have to fight everything alone anymore. His voice was deep but gentle, as if he were afraid of shattering the fragile quiet around them. Nayara looked at him, briefly unsettled. I am used to it. Calvin tilted his head. Being used to something does not make it right. Rowan laid his hand on his knee, his gaze soft. We are not trying to change you. We just want to stand closer, so that when something happens, you are not the only one holding it up. Nayara drew in a long breath. There was something in her eyes that looked like light mixed with fear. But it was Elias who broke the last stretch of silence. He pushed himself up, though his legs still hurt, and walked until he stood right in front of her. Nayara, he said very quietly, I do not know how the others see you, but I see a woman who has held the whole world on her shoulders for far too long. And I... He paused, his voice trembling just a little. I want to help carry it with you, even if it is only a small part. Nayara turned away, her large hands closing into fists. The three of you should not let me pull you into my life. Elias stepped half a pace closer. We are not being pulled. We walked in ourselves. Calvin picked up the thread, his voice as honest as the flames in the stove. You do not have to choose any of us. We did not come here to see who wins. Rowan nodded slowly. We stay because our hearts want to stay, not because we want to own you. Nayara looked at all three of them. The firelight reflected in her dark eyes, bringing every feeling to the surface like light on water. You truly want to be here? Rowan answered first. I am here because I want you to know you are not something to be feared. Calvin said, I am here because I understand the anger inside you. It is like the anger inside me. Elias spoke last. I am here because when you pulled me out of that creek, I knew I could not walk away from you again. Nayara drew in a long, steady breath. She stepped to the door and threw it open. Cold wind burst into the room. The three men watched her, thinking she was about to leave them, but she only stood there, letting the wind lash her skin, letting snow cling to her thick hair. Then she turned back. Her eyes softened in a way they had rarely ever seen. I have been alone my whole life, she said slowly, and I thought I would die that way. But this winter has shown me something. She paused, looking at each of them in turn. I do not have to be lonely anymore. Calvin stood and moved closer. Then, do you want us to stay? Nayara nodded slightly. I do, but if you stay, all three of you need to understand. Elias asked quietly. Understand what? Nayara answered, her voice as firm as the ground under their feet. Understand that I do not belong to any one man. I will not cut anyone out. I want all three of you to step into my life in a way my heart can bear. The three men looked at one another. There was no jealousy, no anger, only a deep understanding carved into them by the winter. Rowan was the first to nod. If that is what gives you peace, then I agree. Calvin laid a hand on Rowan's shoulder. So do I. Elias looked at Nayara, his gaze softening. Just if I can walk beside you, even if I share that place with two other men, I still choose to stay. Nayara smiled, just a little. It was a rare smile, so beautiful that even the fire seemed to quiet. That night, the three men stayed, not like rivals fighting over a woman, but like three souls who had finally found where they belonged. And Nayara, the Apache woman who had once terrified the whole town, finally understood. There are some hearts that do not need to choose. They only need to open wide enough to hold all that they have waited for. for far too long. That winter, Redwater stopped joking that only the wind could make the giant woman bow her head, because they saw her bow it in a different way. She bowed it when she stepped into a small house where 3 men were waiting for her in the golden firelight. And for the first time in her life, she bowed her head not because of the wind, but because of happiness. In Redwater, folks once thought strength had to come from muscle, from the roar of the wind, or from hands that could lift a heavy beam of timber. But that winter taught them something else. True strength, sometimes, is simply a heart that dares to open again after years of being misunderstood. Nayara, Elias, Calvin, and Rowan did not find one another to patch up what they lacked. They came together because their hearts recognized a kind of peace when they stood side by side. And out on the edge of the Redwater woods, that small cabin did not grow warm because of the fire alone. It stayed warm because of something winter could never break: companionship. If you felt a little more at peace after spending time in Redwater tonight, please subscribe to Tales from the Wild West. Hit like, leave a comment, and ring the bell, so that every windy night you will have a soft story waiting for you to lean on.